We started a series last week. You asked for it. We asked you to write on a Connect card some things that you want to have some more information about. And people are asking, what does the Bible say about? And one of the things that was asked about was Sundays and Sabbath and rest. Now, it's interesting to me that some cards use the word Sundays, some cards use the word rest, and some use the word Sabbath on there. So let's see if we can give some definition to this. So if somebody's asking about the Sabbath or asking about rest, and I wondered, is that because they think they need more rest or because somebody else is getting too much rest? I don't know what the motivation was, but kind of here's the question. What do you do with a Sunday? I mean, you're here right now. You came for the 9 o'clock service today. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do with a Sunday? You know, there's a lot of opinions about what we do with a Sunday. Sunday's a great day for sleeping in. Sunday's a great day to go fishing. Sunday's a great day to pull the boat out and get it in the lake. Sunday's a great day to get away with family and do some shopping. Sunday is a great day just to lounge around in your pajamas and watch TV and binge watch. And some people think Sunday's a great day to get together with other believers and get excited about what God's doing in our life and get reconnected again and energized and worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. A lot of opinions about what we do with a Sunday. And the Sundays that we talk about have changed a lot in the course of time, obviously. In the background a little bit on the blue laws. You've heard of a blue law. The blue laws go all the way back to 1781 in the state of Connecticut. And the blue laws were laws that you were supposed to abide by on Sunday. There were certain things that you could do and certain things that you couldn't do, and they were called blue laws because they were printed on blue paper. And they carried through hundreds of years. North Dakota, I think, is one of the last states to kind of hold out to some sense of blue laws in the state, but that all dissipates on the 4th of August this summer. No more blue law. Yeah. You know, when I was a kid growing up here in Williston, I hated Sundays. First of all, I had to spend the whole day with my parents. I had to go to church. And then I had to come home from church and sit and listen to the old people talk. There was nothing to do on Sunday in Williston. Nothing. You think there's nothing to do now. There was nothing to do in Williston when I was a kid growing up. The only place that was open for business in Williston when I was a kid growing up was Service Drug. I don't know, because it was a drugstore. And there were certain things you couldn't even buy. And then as time went on, the blue laws changed a little bit, and the grocery stores started to be open on Sunday because they changed some of the blue laws in the state. And so you could go to the grocery store and you could buy groceries, but there were certain aisles that had tape across them. You couldn't go down that aisle because you couldn't buy anything in that aisle. You could buy stuff in this aisle, but not anything in this aisle. Do you remember that stuff? Yeah, the blue laws in North Dakota. And that all changes. For the next few minutes, I want to talk to you a little bit, I guess, what you'd expect to hear probably from a pastor on the subject. Maybe a little bit like a dad. I thought about Sundays a little bit. I thought, I wonder what Jesus did on Sundays. What would Jesus do today? How would he spend the next hours that are afforded to us on this day? I mean, we're supposed to pattern our lives after Jesus. I think we would all agree with that. We're supposed to do what Jesus did. We're supposed to think the way Jesus thought. We're supposed to live out our lives like that. So what would Jesus do? What would he do with a Sunday? And before we go much further, I think I want to share this with you. It's later on in my notes, and I'll visit this a couple of times. When we talk about Sundays and we talk about Sabbath, Sundays and Sabbath are two different things. And if we confuse Sabbath and Sunday, we can really confuse the meaning of both and how we're supposed to utilize both and be engaged with both. So we're going to define that a little bit. So what were Jesus' views of the Sabbath? And I think this question comes up for a lot of us on a Sunday morning, and some of us that are in this place today, you're a shift worker. People are watching us online today, and they're wondering about Sundays because there's this tinge of guilt, maybe, about not being here today or not being able to be here next Sunday. There's a reason people are watching us online, maybe any number of reasons. The hope that they're watching online, the reason that we live stream is try to reach people that don't normally come into our church. But if you are watching at home today and you could be here, but you decided, this is just a convenient Sunday to just be home and not be engaged, you're a naughty, naughty little person. You need to be here. And I think people ask the question, what about the Sabbath? What about Sundays? What about rest? I think because there's a tinge of guilt when we can't be here because we have to work. You understand that one of the biggest employers in the city of Williston now, after the 4th of August, it all changes for them. And people who want to be here and can be here on a Sunday morning will not be able to be here any longer on a Sunday morning because they're going to have to work for the employer because the blue laws have changed. What do we do with that? Just a side note, your pastor does plan, I'm planning and trying to implement and staff to get to a place that on Wednesday nights, we have a full-blown worship service and some time in the Word on Wednesday nights for people who can't be here on a Sunday. What do we do with these Sundays? How do I deal with my guilt? We just live in this workaholic, epidemic culture. I mean, we're workaholics in this place. In 2014, Gallup did a survey. They surveyed workers and employers and the whole thing in the United States, and they found out that the average American works 48 hours a week in the United States. 48 hours. Some of you are above average, aren't you? And we found out over in Europe, it's not 48 hours, it's 35 hours a week. In the United States, the average vacation length is 2 weeks. And yet, in that 2-week vacation, on average, only 54% of the people that work take advantage of the full 2 weeks. They decide we're going to work the other part of that whole thing. In Europe, it's not 2 weeks, it's 4 or 5 weeks, depending on what country you live in. We can eat at our desk. We eat at our desk, we eat in the truck, we don't take breaks, we read emails late at night. In her book, Working Ourselves to Death, Diane Fossil says that working more isn't getting us ahead, but instead it has become a substitute for life. We used to identify with our families years ago, now we identify with our work. We wear work like a merit badge. We're proud to tell people that we work 48, 58, 70, 100 hours a week. We're proud of that. We identify with that. And this morning, many of you sitting here are tired. You're overworked, you're under-rested, underslept. In fact, if I could talk in a monotone voice long enough without shouting, just keep going, some of you could just drift off to sleep. I don't know about you, but have you ever wished you could just sleep while somebody's talking? Don't you think that would be the best sleep you ever got in a 24-hour period? And if you fall asleep while I'm preaching, I would be complimented by that. That would be awesome. Did I say something funny? We identify with work. Becomes our identity. And the technology that we have at our fingertips now makes it so possible to work everywhere, anytime. And so what do we do with the work demands that really, honestly, there are work demands. Look at the industry that surrounds us where we live. The oil industry doesn't stop for Sunday. The culture that we live in doesn't stop for Sunday. So what do we do with this inner thing that we feel about Sundays? I want you to understand again that Sundays and the Sabbath are two different things. Understand they're two different things. That Sunday is a day for rest. The Sabbath is for the restoration of your soul. And there's two different things, and we're going to explain it. We can find rest and leisure, and understand that rest and leisure are so important to the heart of your Creator. Rest and leisure are so important to the heart of your Creator. He mandated that people rest. He mandated that animals rest. He mandated that the land takes a rest. He knows that we need rest. He just goes there. We know that we need rest, and he addresses the whole physical part of us. What does God say on the whole issue of rest? You've read these verses before. Look what God says on the issue of rest. This is God. I think if God says this, we should probably listen. Look what's said in Genesis chapter 2, verse number 2. Put it on the screen for you here. Genesis 2:2. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, and so he rested from all his work. Goes on to say in verse number 3, and God blessed the seventh day, and he declared it holy because it was a day when he rested from all his work. Interesting to me, if God blesses a day, maybe we should take some time to think about why he blessed that day and set it aside a little bit different from the other days of the week. How many are pretty sure that God did not bless Mondays? Anybody with me on that? But I know that he blessed one day out of the week. God himself rested. And I think if God blessed that day, we need to pull back and say, why? Now understand, here's where some of the confusion comes in. We are all Gentiles, and we live in this thing where Sunday is the first day of the week, and Saturday is the end of the week, and that whole kind of thing goes on. Well, it started out that way, and in a Jewish calendar, the Sabbath, Shabbat, was the seventh day of the week. God rested on Saturday. Well, here we are on Sunday. After the resurrection of Jesus, the believers got together and they worshiped on the first day of the week. Jesus rose again on the third day, which happened to be a Sunday. And so from that point on, our Sabbath turns into a Sunday. So what do we do with these Sundays? And I think there's confusion when we don't know the difference between the Sabbath and a Sunday. Sunday isn't a Sabbath. Sunday is made for rest. The Sabbath is made for your soul. Let me explain to you what the Sabbath is and what rest is and try to distinguish the difference a little bit. I love this story. I don't think I've ever preached this little pericope in the life of Jesus ever on a Sunday morning. It's just a day in the life of Jesus and his followers, but it says so much about the Sabbath and Sunday and what it was made for. Jesus and his disciples were out doing ministry, doing whatever they do. And on this particular day, it happened to be a Saturday. And Mark says this about that day. Look at Mark chapter 2, verse number 23. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off heads of grain to eat. I love this. It's a casual conversation. 13 men. Maybe there was more, but let's just say it was Jesus and the 12. Jesus told a parable once about some seed that fell upon the footpath and some fell amongst thorns and rocks. Well, this is the same kind of a setting, that between the fields of wheat there was a footpath. People could walk on that. And what the disciples were doing that day was even permitted in the Old Testament law. God mandated that if there was people walking through your field and they were hungry, they were permitted to just take they weren't allowed to bring in the machinery and come, but if they needed some food to eat. That poor people could have food to eat if they walked through your field. And so they're not breaking the law that way. They're walking through the field and they're just picking off heads of wheat and they're eating it as they go along. So those paths between the fields were so common, they're not breaking the law as far as eating the grain. God made those allowances, but the day that they picked to pick the wheat was the wrong day to pick the wheat, because now they're going to get picked on by a group of guys called the Pharisees. I think the Pharisees must have been there too. The Pharisees weren't bad guys. I tend to read about the Pharisees, and if this was a melodrama, every time we say Pharisees, we'd hold up a sign that says, boo, boo. But the Pharisees, you understand, were guys that were just, they wanted to keep the law perfectly, because if they kept the law perfectly, it meant that they were perfectly right with God. So it was all about the law. It was about keeping the rules. And I think the Pharisees followed Jesus around, waiting for him to break some infraction so they could accuse him and really just kind of discredit his whole ministry. Well, they saw what was going on that day. They saw what the disciples were doing. On the Sabbath day, they were picking heads of grain. So verse 24 says, these Pharisees spoke up. They said, Look, why are they, your disciples, breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath? How many had a tattletale in your household? Anybody had a tail? How many you were that tattletale? Raise a hand, okay? If you were the younger sibling, you probably were. Here's a tattletale. Now, Jewish law, not God's law, Jewish law had no less than 39 commandments concerning the Sabbath day. You were not allowed to carry anything heavier than a burden. Well, what's a burden? A burden was a dried out fig. So you weren't allowed to carry anything heavier than a dried out fig on Sunday. Now, that wasn't God's law, that was a man-made law, and the Pharisees were very quick to enforce those things. The intent of the law about the Sabbath was completely missed. These Pharisees completely missed the intent of the law. Back in Exodus chapter 35, verse number 2, God said that the Sabbath day was supposed to be a day of complete rest. In fact, if you broke that law, it was punishable with capital punishment. You could have been killed for breaking the Sabbath day. Now. Did animals still have to be fed? Yeah. If somebody was wounded and injured, did somebody have to take care of them? Yeah. But see, the intent of that law was that we would pull back, have some physical rest, step back, just like God did. When God created everything, He rested. I think God stepped back from His creation and went, in fact, it says, this is good. This is very good. I think God just took some time to enjoy the work of His hands and His labors. And God sets aside this day so that we can step back and enjoy the fruit of our labors. I think it's a day to step back and say, you know what, God, You've been so good to me. It was not to be a day to get ahead of the next person, to try to advance yourself, to economically advance yourself and make more money than somebody else. It was not meant for that. And that's why God said, I want you guys just to rest on this day. The purpose was to remember who God is and what God provides for us and not what we provide for ourselves. So the Pharisees asked Jesus, why are these guys breaking the law? And they're breaking the law. They're absolutely breaking the law. Jesus has an answer for them. Look at verse 25. Jesus said to them, haven't you ever read in Scriptures? Now that would have been insulting probably to the Pharisees because they knew the Scriptures. Of course they had read what he's about to cite here. Haven't you read the Scriptures, what David did when he and his companions were hungry? Pull back right here. He's talking about King David. King David was honored amongst the Jews. I mean, like he was a spiritual giant amongst the Jewish people. And so when they're questioning Jesus, Jesus now questions them. I want you guys to remember what you guys read in Scripture, what King David did with his companions. Just a little backstory. King David, before he is a king, is on the run from his enemies, and he's got a whole band of soldiers with him, and they got really, really hungry. And they ran out of food. And so they came to the place where there was a tent set up where God was worshiped. Inside the tent, there was this little space called the Holy of Holies. The Ark of the Covenant was right there. Outside of that, there would have been an altar. And the priests baked 12 loaves of bread. It was called the showbread. One loaf representing each of the tribes of Israel. And it was placed out there on the table. And when new bread was baked, the old bread was taken off, and only, as according to the law, only the priests were allowed to eat that showbread. Look what Jesus says. You know what David did? Verse 26. He went into the house of God, and he broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. And then, not only that, he gave some to all his companions as well. Jesus, in essence, was telling the Pharisees right now, you know what? People are more important than the rules. And for some of you legalistic people, that might be something you need to remember. People were more important than the rules. They just were. And so here's the disciples out in the wheat field that day, like they're breaking all the rules. You weren't supposed to thresh, winnow, or prepare any food on the Sabbath day. And I've grown up on the farm. You walk out there and you pick that head of wheat. You just threshed it. You break off the head, you put it in your hand. You rub it together. The threshing process is going on. You blow away the chaff, and you throw the kernels of wheat in your mouth and you chew it. And it's yummy. And they were doing this. The Pharisees had a real problem with it. They could have done it the day before or the day after, but they picked the Sabbath to do this. And then Jesus goes a step further. And Jesus does a phenomenal job at just winding this whole thing together and says, look, here's the application. Here's the application. Pharisees, listen, here's the application. And I love this verse. Now, look, maybe the verse I'm about to read to you, maybe you grew up in the church, you're like 2-3 generations ago, you grew up in the church, and the whole thing about Sundays and work and not work on Sunday and all of that. And I think legalism can get so confusing because, well, I have a job and I have to work, and people come to church and go, well, you're not supposed to do any work. Well, can I mow my lawn? No, you can't mow your lawn. Can I wash the car? No, can't wash the car. Can we go out to eat? Yeah, we can go out to eat. Do you see the hypocrisy in that? We can't work, but we'll make somebody else work. Can't do that. That's hypocrisy. And we have that hypocrisy, like we're not allowed to work, but we'll make somebody else work for us. And that's because we've confused the Sabbath and a Sunday. Let me explain further. Look what he says in verse 27. Jesus says this. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, and not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. And that might rock your world a little bit. See, the Pharisees were all about the rules. Jesus was all about relationship. The Pharisees were all about the rules. Jesus was all about relationship. He's saying, look, the Sabbath day was a creation of God. We're not here to serve the creation. Boy, there's a whole sermon for environmentalists right there, isn't there? We weren't here to serve creation. Creation is here to serve people. And you guys need to get this right. He's saying that we're not here to serve Sundays and be underlords of the Sabbath. We're here because the Sabbath is here to serve the needs of people, because people are important. And then Jesus has the big conclusion at the end. At the end. Understand this, that the Sabbath and Sunday are two different things. And let me show you how Jesus puts it all together in verse number 28. Here's the conclusion. So, the Son of Man, talking about himself, Jesus, is Lord even over the Sabbath. Here's the big picture. You know what? You know what he's saying? Sunday is a day of rest for your body. The Sabbath is a time of rest for your soul. One addresses the physical, the other addresses the spiritual. Jesus came to be the fulfillment of the Sabbath. He is the Sabbath. He's the Sabbath day of rest. When we get to heaven, it's the Sabbath day of rest. It's our Shabbat. We're going to get home. It's going to be the place where we rest forever and ever. And Jesus was the forerunner of our Sabbath. It wasn't the day, it's the man, Jesus, where we find our rest. Rest is found in Jesus. Look what he says in Matthew 11:28. Jesus said, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry your heavy burdens, and I will give you, say it with me, rest. He says in the next verse, take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle of heart, and I will help you find rest for your souls. The imagery there is oxen. And you'd yoke oxen together, and they'd pull that heavy load together. Jesus said, throw the yoke over my shoulders, you throw it over your shoulders. Let's do life together. Stop pulling at this all by yourself. Stop thinking that you need to do this all by yourself. I'm here to help you through the difficult times. You will not find rest. You will not find rest in stuff. You'll find rest in Jesus. And finally, he says in verse 30, look, my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. And some of you today, come on, moms, you are stressed, overwhelmed. Men, you work far more than 40 hours a week. You're tired in life. And the Sabbath is more important than a day. And we live, look, let's just be honest, we live in a culture that knows very well how to provide leisure and recreation. But our culture doesn't arrest or address the soul. It addresses the body, but not the soul. And let me just tell you this. There's so many ways to find rest and relaxation, but when crisis hits your life in a full burst, nobody's going to call the RV dealership and go, you know, you guys sold me an RV. It's been great. We have really loved spending the weekends in our RV, but my wife has cancer, and I just wonder if you could pray with us and walk through this whole ordeal with us. You know what? Nobody's going to call the team coach and say, Coach, my daughter was just in a tragic car accident. Can you walk us through that? Can you help us get through this crisis right now with our daughter? Nobody's going to call the store clerk and say, you know, you sold me these fishing rods. The fishing rods are great. They're great. But right now I'm facing bankruptcy. Would you please just come and pray with me and visit me and just kind of help me out? You know who we're going to call on when crisis comes? Jesus. Amen. We're going to call upon the Lord of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a gift from God. The Sabbath is a gift from God. The Sabbath is a gift from God. Sunday is for your body. The Sabbath is for your soul. And His name is Jesus. Never confuse Sunday with the Sabbath. Let me end with this. Let me just end with this. What are we supposed to do with everything that we just heard? I'm just going to tell you this, and I realize how insensitive I might be, how out of touch with reality I might be, but I'm telling you, church, for your own soul, would you guard your Sundays? Guard your Sundays. If you don't fill up your Sundays with Jesus, the culture that we live in will fill it up with something else. It's amazing to me. It's amazing to me. In all the years that I've served Jesus Christ, I've never had a problem getting to church on Sunday. I just got here this morning. Woke up 11 minutes late, but I'm here this morning. I just seem to get to church every Sunday morning. Nothing seems to hinder me getting to church and worshiping the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords every Sunday morning. I remember sitting around the table with our son. He's a teenager. Why do I have to go to church? Why do I have to go to church? Why do I have to go to church? And we had the visit with him. Sonny boy, listen, even if your mother and dad weren't in ministry, you'd be in church on Sunday morning to worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You guard your Sundays, church. For the sake of your soul, you guard your Sundays. I'd also say this, protect your faith. Protect your faith. You know, it's interesting to me, I see people come in and they find something in a worship service. They'll find Jesus, they find an experience, and they just fall in love with something here, and they weep and they weep and they weep and they cry and they mourn and they sob and they get healed and restored and filled. And then we missed a Sunday. And then we missed 2 Sundays. And then we missed 3 Sundays. And now we've missed 4. And it's so easy to just get into the routine and just not be in God's presence. And then when we start thinking about going back into church, we're afraid to go back to church. We're afraid to go back to church because what's everybody going to think? They're going to ask the questions, where you been? And then this is a whole uncomfortable thing. We run into the pastor at Walmart, like, oh, why do we have to see him? He's going to ask us why we haven't been to church. It's so easy to drift away from Jesus. All you have to do to drift away from Jesus is absolutely nothing. I'm so proud of you for being here today. Listen, what we do online and our live stream is no substitute for being in the presence of other believers, to find the synergy and the energy of worshiping with Jesus. Jesus is our Sabbath rest.